Getting started with the tablet, you should have this image downloaded in your Photoshop and opened. At this point, I would zoom in on your image, and as you're looking at this photo on the top, this is what you're going for with this tutorial. So this is what you're going to try to complete and practice on the bottom half of this image. So bottom half is what you're going to edit. On the top half here, you're going to notice at the top of the image a couple of different settings. And that's what you're going to want your Photoshop to look like. So we're going to start out and grab the mixer brush tool, which is shown on the left here. And that is under the regular paintbrush. If you click and hold that down, you'll see all the way at the bottom the mixer brush tool. So click on that. And then just going from left to right at the top of the screen, you need to change your color to white. So it might automatically be set as default to black. So down in your color here, just double click, change your color to white, hit OK. And then the next thing to adjust are these two settings here. So this one on the left is to load the brush after each stroke. So that's going to load your brush with paint. So it's going to keep that color that you previously used and load it onto your brush. And then the next one here, keep that one unchecked, but this is clean the brush after each stroke. So keep that unchecked for now. You can experiment with it depending on what you decide to do in the future. The next setting, you want this drop-down arrow to be set to very wet, heavy mix for your paint. But these are just some other ways that you can mix your paintbrush. So you can have maybe just a little bit of water, which means that it's not going to brush as much paint or make it look as smooth or fluid. So for now, again, set it to very wet, heavy mix, but in the future you can go back and try some of those settings out. Everything else should be set up okay over here. Just make sure it's set to 100, 50, 100, and then 100. Make sure that you select the button at the top that says Sample All Layers, so there should be a check through that. If you don't check that off as you are drawing and starting to brush the background here, when you're on this new layer, you'll notice that it's white. So it's taking that white clean background and using that. So what you want to do is have that button selected so it's sampling your background layer while you're on the top layer and it's using that color on the table. The next step is to choose a paintbrush to use. So I'm going to go over to my brushes. It doesn't really matter which one you decide to go with, so I'm just going to click on one here to use for now. I would change the size to around 20 depending on your brush. So this one might work out okay around 30. And then I'm going to add a new layer. So I'm going to click here and add my new layer. So that's very important to have a new layer. Otherwise it's going to throw everything off in the future. So add that new layer to your background. Now on this new layer, I'm going to start by painting around my image, and I'm making sure that I'm zoomed out enough that I can see this image on the top just to see kind of the end result that you're going for, what you should be practicing with. So using my tablet, I'm going to start out and just choose an area to begin, and I'm going to go over it trying to follow the contour. So I'm trying to follow that curve of the mug here, and I'm just painting kind of back and forth to bring in some of the color, some of the value there, and creating some brush strokes. So it's pretty thick, pretty clunky brush strokes, which is what you're going for. So I'm going to paint around the edge here. Make sure that you're not doing something like this, just shading really quickly up and down. You should be going for something more like this, where you're following the direction of those brush strokes. So keep painting around here. Try to keep some of those value changes. So you want to make sure that this is still pretty dark at the bottom of the cup, and then you have that highlight in here. So as you're painting, you'll notice that it picks up the color that you were already working with and just kind of moves that around. So again, make sure that you're going over those darker areas, lighter areas to keep that value change. So I'm going to just keep going around here, following that curve. Following the curve of the plate. I'm going to try and just brush out that spoon so you can see in this image up here. You can't really see much of the spoon in the photo just by the way that it was painted, so just minimizing some of that detail. So it should almost look like an impressionist painting, if you're familiar with those, where you can see those really heavy, thick brush strokes throughout. Also in this image, you'll see some of that smoke coming up, so that was just kind of an extra creation here, but can bring some of those lines up by waving that around. And I might want to bring in some of those colors down here. So again, just painting around the image, bringing in some of those dark shadows at the bottom. Now, as I'm painting this dark shadow, I'm going to try not to bring it over where it's overlapping and blurring out my image, so I'm going to undo that really quick. But again, as I'm painting, I'm following that general area that the shadow's in and then the white of the plate as I'm painting around here. Now, when you get to an area such as this, where you want to blend that background without smudging the smoke, you're going to want to create a new layer. So this could be something such as eyelashes in an image, or where you have that background that you need to adjust. So instead of trying to go around the smoke there and it blending in, I'm going to undo that. And what you want to try to do is hide this layer first, add a new layer, move it below that layer, and then you're going to just paint that background first. So I'm going to go around the edge of the cup here, move this around, blend that out. And I know it's tricky for those of you who are more on the perfectionist side, where you want everything to be super exact and detailed. But again, for this project, you really want to make sure that you're blending things out so you can see the brush strokes. So you don't want it to look just like a photo. You want to make sure it's obvious that you're painting it and giving it that little bit of an effect there. So then once you have that background painted, then you can bring your top layer back, and you'll see how you still have that steam coming up out of the coffee there. So then I'm going to just keep going around here. Now as you look at the smoke here, you might notice that it's kind of a little bit more kind of obvious that it wasn't blended with the background and you have those two layers compared to this top image, so you can see how that's blended out a little bit better. So something you can try to do is just going back to your top image here, maybe getting a smaller brush. You can try and touch up and blend in some of those areas. So I can go back over this now, maybe try to blend that smoke up and into the background a little bit. So that's something you can try just to make it really look like it fits in that space more. And again, you can use this smaller brush to touch up some of those smaller areas as well, some of the detail, but you don't want your image to be too detailed as you're working. So I'm going to get that brush bigger again and continue going through, completing the image. As soon as you are done, make sure that you are saving this as a JPEG and then turning it back in on Classroom.